Okay, thank you. Good morning. This is Greg Longini. I am the Board Secretary of the Chicago Transit Board. I would like to note that in accordance with Executive Orders 2020-7 and 2020-10 and 2020-37, issued by Governor J.B. Pritzker, and further guidance issued by the Illinois Attorney General's Office, this meeting will be conducted via teleconference through WebEx. The audio of this meeting is being streamed live on CTA's website, along with closed captioning. And public comment speakers have been invited to join the teleconference and have been provided with a telephone number by our board secretary to do so. With that, Chairman Irvine, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Greg. Good morning. This is Kevin Irvine, and I would like to call to order the May 13th, 2020 meeting of the Committee on Strategic Planning and Service Delivery. Would the secretary please call the roll?
Yes. Reverend Miller.
Here.
Director Peterson.
Here.
Director Alba-Rosales.
Here.
Chairman Irvine.
I'm here.
Let the record, we have a quorum, but let the record also show that Directors Chevrolet, Jakes, and Silva are participating in this meeting, as is President Dorval Carter and General Counsel Karen Simons. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Greg. Our first order of business is the review of the minutes of the July 17th, 2019 and January 15th, 2020 committee minutes. The minutes were previously distributed. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Director Alba-Rosales and seconded by Director Peterson. I will now take a roll call vote on the minutes. Reverend Miller.
Abstain.
Director Peterson.
Yes.
Director Alba-Rosales.
Yes.
Chairman Irvine.
Yes.
The motion to approve the two sets of minutes are approved with 3 yes votes and 1 abstention by Director Miller.
Thank you. Our next order of business is the review of an ordinance authorizing an additional experiment for bus route number 31/31st. Mike Conley will be presenting. Mike?
Good morning. I'm Mike Conley, your Chief Planning Officer. When we briefed board members in February about the ridership on this bus route, we were very positive and excited due to the ridership increases we had observed after the board approved adding morning rush hour service last fall. We come back to you today in a different and more uncertain situation. Staff are recommending at the current time that the board approve a 1-year extension of the current pilot service through June of 2021. With the pandemic affecting all CTA service and deeply depressing movement of all kind and therefore transit use, this is not a propitious time to make permanent changes to the CTA system, even for a well-received route like this. It will continue to serve our customers well, and given the region's status in the COVID spectrum, considerations of what the CTA system will look like post-pandemic are best left to future discussions and future decisions by the board. Staff are therefore recommending that the board approve the ordinance before you, which would extend the current route operation for 1 year from mid-June of 2020 through mid-June of 2021. Thank you. I would be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Thank you, Mike. I will now ask the board members if they have any questions regarding this item. Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No question.
Chairman Irvine.
No questions, but I just want to say thank you for continuing to work on this, and I understand why we have to continue to keep it on a trial basis. So thanks, Mike, and thanks to your team. That's all.
Thank you. Director Silva.
No question.
Director Alba-Rosales.
No questions, but also, very happy that we're looking at this, because my understanding, we had an increase from originally when we changed around the times to what we have them now. And so, it's good to keep an eye on something that seems to be progressing, and hopefully after we're done with this, that we'll continue to do so. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Peterson.
No question.
We are finished with the questions, Director Irvine.
Thank you, Greg. Since there are no further questions, may I have a motion to place this item on the omnibus and recommend it for board approval?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Director Alvarez-Rosales and seconded by Director Peterson. I will now take a roll call vote. Director Miller.
Abstain.
Director Miller, this is not the minutes, so you do not have to abstain if you don't wish.
Okay.
So you're going to vote yes?
Yes on this.
Okay.
Yes.
Director Miller votes yes. Director Peterson?
Yes.
Director Alvarez-Rosales?
Yes.
Chairman Irvine?
Yes.
That motion is approved with 4 yes votes, sir.
Thank you. Since there is no further business to come before this committee, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Motion to adjourn. Reverend Miller?
Yes.
Director Peterson?
Yes.
Director Alvarez-Rosales?
Yes.
Chairman Irvine?
Yes.
The motion to adjourn is approved with 4 yes votes, and we are adjourned.
Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome, sir. Tracy, are you ready for the next committee meeting? Good morning. My name is Gregory Longini, Secretary of the Chicago Transit Board. I would like to note that in accordance with Executive Orders 2020-7, 2020-10, and 2020-37, issued by Governor J.B. Pritzker, and further guidance issued by the Illinois Attorney General's Office, this meeting will be conducted via teleconference through WebEx. The audio for this meeting is being streamed live on the CTA's website, along with closed captioning. And public comment speakers have been invited to join the teleconference and have been provided with a telephone number by our board secretary to do so. Chairman Silver, we are ready to begin the meeting.
Good morning.
Good
I
morning.
would like to call to order the May 13, 2020 meeting of the Committee on Finance, Audit, and Budget. Will the Secretary call the roll?
Yes, sir. Judge Chevrolet.
Here.
Reverend Jakes.
Here.
Reverend Miller.
Here.
Director Irvine.
Here.
Chairman Silva.
Yes.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
Here.
Director Peterson.
Here.
We have a quorum of the committee with all 7 members present, sir. Oh, and let the record also show that President Dorval Carter and General Counsel Karen Simons are in attendance. So, Chairman Silva, we can move on to agenda item number 2.
Our first order of business is the approval of the committee minutes of April 8, 2020. Will the Secretary call the roll?
Yes. Judge Chevrolet.
Here.
Reverend Jakes.
Here.
Reverend Miller.
Yes.
Director Irvine.
Yes.
Chairman Silva.
Yes.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
Here.
Director Peterson.
Here.
The minutes are approved with 7 yes votes, sir, and we can move on to agenda item number 3.
Wait. Okay.
Hold on, Director Silver. Hold on 1 second. Was that Mark speaking?
Yeah, I muted his line. Sorry about that. He's
So
muted
should we
now.
continue?
You can proceed, yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, Director Silver, please proceed on to agenda item number 3.
Our next order of business is the finance report. Jeremy Fine.
Thank you. Good morning. This is Jeremy Fine, your CFO, and I wanted to give a rundown of March results. The stay-at-home order went into effect on March 21st, so ridership and related revenues began to feel the full effect after that date. With regard to March revenues, we see Farebox was down to budget by almost $13 million. Passes were down to budget by almost $7 million. And again, that drop was seen, as we went into the stay-at-home order. Reduced fare subsidy was at budget. From a cash flow perspective, we did receive a portion of the payment, $12 million, from the state within the last week or so. Non-fare box is down about $100,000, but again, just as other ridership-related revenues are being impacted, we'll keep an eye on this as we move forward as the stay-at-home order continued into effect into April and May. So total revenue was down approximately $19.5 million. Free rides were down about $1.2 million, or about 25%, while ridership in general was down closer to 40%. Turning the page to the year-to-date revenues, we see the vectors relatively the same across the categories, but we see the year-to-date total revenues were down about $20 million, or $20.2 million to budget. Again, 19.5 of that was due to March alone. With regard to expenses for the month of March, we see labor slightly negative to budget by about $480,000 due to COVID-related costs. We see materials negative to budget by about $830,000, primarily due to COVID-related costs, but also due to timing of material purchases. Fuel was positive to budget by about $500,000 due to lower spot pricing for the portion that we do not pre-purchase, as well as consumption because you don't idle as much in heavy traffic. We also saw a positive benefit on power by about $500,000, and we see injuries and damages and security services essentially flat to budget, and other expenses positive to budget by about $440,000. So overall total for March for expenses, we were positive to budget by about $250,000. But again, due to the drag of the revenues, we see the net against revenues down a little over $19 million. On a year-to-date expense basis, we see the vectors relatively the same across the categories, and we see total expenses down approximately $740,000. And again, net against revenues were down approximately $21 million year-to-date. Public funding for 2020, we see that down about $9.5 million. Sales tax, which we received the first payment for the calendar year 2020. We received the January payment, which was down slightly to budget by about $334,000. That's, again, for January time period. Sales tax for March, which will, again, see the first effects of the COVID outbreak and the stay-at-home orders, will be received in June. So it'll be later in the summer when we start seeing the full effect on the sales tax receipts from the pandemic. PTF through April, so January through April, is down about $1.6 million. RET for January through March is down about $6.6 million. We do continue to see a little bit of benefit of real estate closings that were in the pipeline prior to the pandemic. But again, we'll keep an eye on how that continues to manifest as the stay-at-home order remained in effect. The PTF on RET was down about $1 million, so again, about 9.5 down on public funding on a year-to-date basis. With regard to the cash position, again, we benefited from the fact that the reduced fare reimbursement, from the state was received. We usually receive a portion of it earlier around this time, and then there's a true-up payment, in the fall. So that additional cash infusion, along with an advance of PTF funds from the RTA, allows us to continue to cover our costs in the near future here as we continue to wait for the federal funding to come online. We are in the final stages of receiving approval to start receiving those fundings. And again, we expect that hopefully within the next week or so as the federal government continues to work through that process. So again, that is a substantial amount of funding in the form of the CARES Act. But again, that is replacing lost revenue, as we highlighted here for the month of March. That will obviously continue into April and May and beyond. So it is very critical for us to continue to receive the public funding subsidies that we receive from the state and other local governmental institutions as we move forward. Because again, that federal funding is a nice lifeline and a bridge, but again, it's just replacing lost revenues, whether they're being fare box revenues or other expenses that we're covering with regard to COVID. But again, it's critical for us to continue to receive those state funding strips. With regard to the commodities on the final page of the report, we were able to lock in 50% of the fuel needed in 2022 at $1.88. So it was actually a little bit better than what we had discussed at the prior board meeting. So we were able to lock in at $1.88, which is very favorable to the historically low rates that we had previously locked in at. So that will provide us almost $3 million of savings vis-a-vis the 2021 budget, or almost $10 million of savings versus the 2022 budget. But again, a little bit of silver lining in the larger scope of the pandemic, we were able to lock in at very low prices for our fuel purchases for 2022. This concludes my report, and I'm glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Jeremy.
I have a question. The $12 million that we received from the state, how much they still owe us?
So, usually we receive about, half of the $14.5 million, in the late spring, and then they true it up in the fall. This year, they were able to forward us $12 million of the $14.5 that they owe us over the course of the year. So again, for the the so-called spring installment, we received $12 million of the $14.5.
Okay, so is that, but we still gonna be pushing, to get that money, right?
Yes, absolutely. They have typically trued that up in the fall, around September. There's not been any indication that they wouldn't do so. So again, we'll continue to make our voices heard with regard to the reduced fare subsidy, as well as, again, the other, streams of public funding that we receive from the state and others.
Any further questions, Chairman Silva? Do you have?
Yes, go.
No, Chairman Silva, do you have any further questions?
No, I don't have anyone.
Okay, so you've concluded your questioning, sir. Okay, let me move on to the other board members then, please. Judge Chevrolet.
Greg?
I'm sorry?
Greg, this is Dorval.
Yes, Dorval.
Before you continue to question,
sure.
I want to make one additional comment on Jeremy's report.
Okay.
Obviously, March is a very weird month for what we're going through, because it's almost, as I've heard Jeremy state in the past, it's a tale of two different months. The first half of the month was fairly normal in terms of our revenue and expenses. The second half of the month was a complete, reversal of all of that. Having said that, I can tell you that April is going to look nothing like March in terms of both revenue loss and expenses. And I think that's one of the reasons why Jeremy is making the point about the importance of our continuing to receive the subsidies that we need, as well as the importance of the federal funding that is being provided under the CARES Act to help to offset these losses. Jeremy mentioned that we saw a 40% loss in ridership in March, but once the pandemic kicked in, that dropped to about 80%. We are losing over $1 million a day in fare box revenue the way things currently exist, and we're expending or on track to expend upwards of $25 million more just in cleaning costs because of the need to increase the cleaning and sanitation of CTA system going forward. Those numbers are going to start to play out in future reports for us, and so I want the board to at least have the context around the numbers that we're looking at right now. with understanding that obviously this is going to be a long-term impact to CTA. We are not going to recover quickly from the impact of this pandemic. And as that we started implementing at the same time that we implemented our rear door boarding policy. We expect to continue that policy for the foreseeable future, regardless of what starts to happen with the reopening of the city. And obviously, we're very much involved and integral in the discussions about how the city will open up and what the impact of that will be on transit. I think one of the important things to keep in mind as we start that conversation is that we have a limit on capacity in terms of what we can provide in terms of transit service and still maintain social distancing on our system. I currently am I'm using about 20% of the capacity of the system with the ridership that we're carrying right now. I don't anticipate that percentage is going to increase dramatically over the course of the reopening process, particularly as long as the virus itself continues to be a problem. And so what that means is that the way people commute and the way people use public transit is going to have to dramatically change. That means that employers are going to have to really rethink how they want employees to come to work, when they want employees to come to work, and how flexible they're going to have to be about their commute patterns in order to be able to provide the level of capacity to keep everyone safe. We at CTA are not going to be able to, police social distancing. It's just not a practical solution to the problem. And so there's going to be a high level of personal accountability that's going to be placed on individuals to make the right decisions, to not get on a bus if the bus is crowded, to not get on a rail car if the rail car is crowded, and to adjust their travel patterns accordingly. We, of course, are going to do everything that we can to educate, inform, and support our customers as we go through this process. But as you can imagine, my primary concern is maintaining the safety of both our employees and our customers. And in order to do that, I am going to need the assistance of others. We will be having those conversations with the city as they start to develop and implement their plan. We are not facing anything any differently than any other transit system is around the country. I am personally in conversation with transit agencies all over the country as we all talk about how we're going to do this. And I think thematically you're going to be hearing the same thing everywhere. Public transit, as we are used to seeing it, with packed buses and packed rail cars, is not consistent with the reality of how we're going to have to operate during this pandemic. And that reality is going to be a part of the new normal until we're at a point where the virus has been addressed and contained.
Thank you, Dorval. I will now ask the other board members if they have any questions for either Dorval or for Jeremy. I'll start with Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No question.
Director Irvine.
No questions, but I just want to commend Dorval and your whole team and really everyone at CTA for, everything you've gone through the last couple of months, pivoting and managing how we're responding to this. And you're doing a great job. So we really appreciate it. And the whole city appreciates it too. I know. Thank you. No more questions.
Okay. Director Alva Rosales.
No questions. I'm just glad to hear also that there's such a large level of coordination that's going on. I know it's both with the city and the state, so I'm glad to hear that. And thanks again for all your hard work. That's all.
Thank you. Director Peterson.
Thanks, Greg. Jeremy, I've got a couple of questions regarding the budget. Question one, I just don't recall offhand, and this kind of gets to what is the ratio that the RTA requires in terms of, I don't know if it's 60-40 public funding versus fare box. What is that ratio?
So as a region, we have to hit 50%,
Okay.
and so that's the target number that we have to breach as a whole RTA entity, CTA, Metra, and PACE.
So the question is that the question is then, in light of COVID-19, and it's going to be hard, as you and Dorval has mentioned, it's going to be tough even when the ridership starts to come back. It is not going to be possible to hit those ratios. And so I'm trying to see if there have been any conversations with the RTA on how those are going to get modified, with this year being an outlier. But even as you start to plan for the 2021 budget, I got to believe that that ratio is going to be hard to hit as well. So that's the first question.
So those conversations, have been taking place. The RTA is, under the track of utilizing the funding that we're receiving from the federal government, which is essentially revenue replacement for fare boxes. And that portion that would be essentially revenue replacement for lost fare box revenues because of COVID would be allocated as such. And if that's the case, and they're taking that to their board, I believe this month, and they're running the traps with the state, that would suffice for us to be able to breach that 50% threshold as a region. So again, the federal funds would be allocated, as quote unquote replacement revenues for those lost fare box revenues.
Okay. Second question.
Terry, this is Dorval. Just to further complete Jeremy's thought on this, there's also, as you pointed out, the longer term impact of the recovery ratio requirements on what will probably be a slow recovery in terms of our revenues and ridership. And we have also been talking to RTA about legislative relief that would allow for more flexibility in recovery ratio for some temporary period of time until the region basically recovers and is in a position financially to properly calculate that ratio based on revenue and expenses going forward.
Okay, great. Last question, Jeremy. I know we last talked, there was some flexibility in terms of the CARE money, and you just talked about some of that money, if not a majority of it, can be used to recover dollars lost in the fare box. Question, I know we've got some debt, and that normally comes off the top of our revenue, some debt that we're servicing. So I'm trying to find out if we're able to also, since some of that $800 million goes toward fare box losses, and normally we take operation dollars to pay debt service, are we able to also pay down our debt service with some of the federal stimulus money?
So we're still working through the details of all of that. We do have other revenues that continue to come in, whether it's albeit less than anticipated fare box funding dollars that come in, as well as other public funding dollars. So we do have other funding strips that are available to pay for certain costs. But again, we're working through, this is obviously a dynamic process with the FTA folks on allowable uses, but again, it's primarily for the COVID-related expenses and other operating expenses of the transit agencies, whether that's CTA or other transit agencies across the country. Again, still working through those details, but again, we also have other funding strips that we're able to use.
So just a question. Yes.
Just to put a finer point on what Jeremy is saying, there's a distinction between eligible costs for person receiving the funds and then what happens with those funds once we receive them. In other words, what Jeremy's talking about is whether or not debt service as an eligible cost can be directly applied for to receive federal funds. We do know that lost revenue can be applied for use of federal funds, And once you receive those funds, you can use that money for whatever you would normally use revenue for. So there's a direct and an indirect conversation going on here that ultimately gets to the concern that you have. The question that Jeremy is discussing with the federal government is whether or not I can directly just take those payments and apply for federal funds to pay for them. I may not be able to do that. I think that's still being discussed. But that doesn't mean that once I've received the money, that money then isn't eligible for me to use for that purpose. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. And the reason I was thinking, and, I'm always looking at what's going on here at Rush and then thinking about, CTA, one of the reasons that I raised the question, I know trying to work through this with the federal government is, I know there are other revenues coming in. I don't know what our monthly debt service payments are, $3 million, $4 million, $2 million. But let's say, for example, worst case scenario, we have to continue to use other sources other than federal money, trying to see at what point do we, and I don't even know, Jeremy, if you thought this far down the road, but at what point do we run the risk of defaulting on debt if we can't, use the federal money? So how much of a runway do you have with other revenue sources coming in?
There is no risk of defaulting on debt. No risk of defaulting on debt. We have enough runway to deal with the debt service payments, so there is absolutely no risk of defaulting on debt.
And so how much of a runway in terms of months do you have without using some of this CARE money to continue to pay debt service? What is that monthly? I don't know how.
The only dollars that we have on the operating budget is with regard to the pension obligation bonds, and that's about $13 million a month.
Okay. All right. Okay. No further question.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, okay? Are we checking what the capacity of the buses is, okay, and if we were going to need further more investment, okay, in buses, okay, in order to meet the demand, okay, that we're going to have in 1 or 2 years?
No, we're not looking to increase our fleet size for a couple of reasons. One, the practical timing of how long it would take for me to do that wouldn't help in the short term or even in the medium term to address our capacity needs. This is not an issue that I can address from adding more buses or rail cars. It's an issue that I have to address by controlling the demand for the use of the vehicles. And that's why I was making the comments I was making earlier about the need for employers and others to look at ways to help create flexibility about how our system is used. The adding additional equipment isn't going to solve that problem. And there's a limitation in terms of the capacity of our entire system to even accommodate additional equipment. I only have rail yards that are so big. I only have garages that can hold so many buses. So we really don't have the physical ability to expand our fleet dramatically beyond what it currently is at.
So we are at full capacity right now?
Pretty much. Many of my yards are at capacity. As you know, one of the reasons why the Red Line extension is such an important project for us is not just because of the service that we can provide to the far south side of the city, but it also allows me to create a new rail yard to actually manage the additional rail cars I need. So, yeah, to a great degree, we are close to capacity in terms of the amount of equipment that CTA can operate and maintain within our existing infrastructure.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Chairman Silva, do you have any further questions? Or
No, I don't.
Okay. Well, then there are no further questions, Chairman Silva, on this item, so we may proceed to committee agenda item number 4.
Our next order of business is the review of an ordinance amending ordinance number 019-103, approving the fiscal years 2020-2024 capital improvement program. Jeremy.
Thank you. This is Jeremy Fine, your CFO, and I'm joined by Michelle Curran, who is Vice President of Budget and Capital Finance, and she'll walk through the details.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Michelle Curran, Vice President of Budget and Capital Finance. I'm here today to present an amendment to the 2020 to 2024 Capital Improvement Program, or CIP. In November 2019, the board approved the $5.1 billion CIP. We are now amending the CIP as we do each year after federal appropriations are finalized and to incorporate any additional known changes. The amendment is being done to facilitate several changes. First, it is being done to decrease the amount of federal formula funds by $14.5 million based on the final federal appropriations. This amount, however, is still higher than what was initially approved under the FAST Act. Second, to increase the amount of federal discretionary funds awarded through CMAP for $76.5 million to fund several projects, including $20.3 million for ADA improvements at the Austin Green Line Station, $39.1 million to purchase additional new e-buses as well as charging infrastructure, $16.9 million to mitigate bus slow zones, and $375,000, including the local match, to develop a plan to identify potential bus enhancements. Third, we will reprogram $1.5 million of bond funds allocated in a prior CIP to support the modification of the equipment room at Skokie Shop, allowing for testing equipment to service the new rail cars. Fourth, we will align the timing of existing state bond funding with the state grant. And finally, to align existing federal formula funds with project needs. The net funding increase for the 2020 to 2024 CIP is $63.6 million. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm now going to poll the board on questions for this item. Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No questions.
Director Irvine.
No questions.
Chairman Silva.
No question.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
No questions.
Director Peterson.
No questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no further questions on this item, Chairman Silva.
Since there are no further questions, may I have leave to place this item on the omnibus for board approval?
So moved. Second.
The motion was moved by Director Jakes and seconded by Director Miller, so it is now on the omnibus. But Chairman Silva, before we proceed, I was just informed that we wanted to present a ridership report. So we're going to just suspend going on to the next item and ask Mike Connolly to please join the proceedings and present that ridership report.
Okay.
Mike?
Thank you. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Chairman Silva. This is Mike Connolly, your Chief Planning Officer. We're preparing to give you a little deeper briefing about ridership changes. As has been already discussed, March was an unusual month, and this monthly data for ridership in your report distributed with your packets this month is for the month of March. It's validated March ridership results. Validated April ridership results will be available late this month and will be available in your June board materials. The ridership losses referred to due to the Corona-19 virus began on the week of March 12th as some offices closed and many businesses sent workers home to telecommute. The losses picked up on March 13th when the governor closed the public schools across the state, effective Monday, March the 16th. That weekend, the Chicago St. Patrick's Day Parade and the Dyeing of the River were canceled, which probably saved thousands of people. The following week, the stay-at-home order by the governor was issued effective Saturday, March the 21st. By Monday, March 23rd, CTA rail ridership was down by 84% and CTA bus ridership was down by 71%. This level of ridership loss has continued through the remainder of March and substantially the same through the month of April, with some fluctuations due to weather. CTA is still carrying a substantial number of riders. It's often been said that we carry 1.5 million riders per weekday. That was before the COVID pandemic. And that level of 1.5 million is equal to the population of the entire city of Philadelphia. We're now carrying 300,000 riders a day, equal to the population of the city of Pittsburgh. Or, in another comparison, equal to the average weekday pre-COVID ridership of the entire Houston metro system. Ridership losses are not even across either the bus or the rail system. On the rail system, the loop stations and the Brown line are down by about 90% of their ridership. Losses on the Dan Ryan branch and on the South Green line are only in the 60% range. On the bus system as well, commuter-type express bus routes have lost higher percentages of riders, and high-volume arterial crosstown routes serving the south and west sides of the city have seen lower ridership losses. We maintained overall more of the bus ridership than rail ridership, given the geographic coverage of our bus network. For both bus and rail, the former rush periods have been replaced with a gradual increase late morning and a peak ridership in the mid-afternoon. This is, as has been mentioned, an unprecedented fundamental change. We do not expect that ridership recovery will occur as quickly as the losses occurred. CTA is committed to serving those riders who need to use our transportation system for essential trips. The frontline drivers, train operators, and customer assistants perform heroically each day to keep service out on the street and on the tracks and visiting our stations. We are using rear door boarding to help protect our bus operators, and parts of the rail cars near the operator cab have been sectioned off to help protect these essential transit workers. CTA operations staff have been both flexible and agile in responding to the ridership changes. CTA has introduced maximum passenger load standards for our buses to encourage adequate space for social distancing. Service has been altered by reallocation of our larger 60-foot buses to routes which have seen less ridership loss. And our bus operations team is implementing both short turns to focus more service where it is needed and using gap buses or extra buses to provide quick service into locations that are experiencing crowding. CTA is preparing a survey of riders to go a little deeper into ascertaining who exactly is riding and the purposes of their travel. And CTA staff have convened a COVID-19 strategic planning task force to prepare the organization for reopening of the city. As has been mentioned, coordination continues with all levels of government and within the city and the region here. Your transit system is dedicated to continuing to serve our riders now and to ensuring that in the post-pandemic future, public transit will be a vital part of our region's transportation infrastructure. Thank you. I'll be glad to try to take any questions.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions for Mike on our ridership? We'll start with Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
Yes, just one question. As Mike shared, that the south and west sides did not see the same decrease. Would it be safe to say that these are the area, Mike, where we are having the complaint of overcrowdedness?
Yes, specifically those areas that have seen less ridership loss.
Okay. And I know I heard President Carter say, yeah, that's we can police, but you're saying that we do have the gap buses and other buses. So it's what are we doing to try to curtail that? We putting out any information, or I know we can't police it, but what is CTA doing to try to help that?
We do have posters on all of our vehicles, both buses and trains, to encourage people to maintain social distancing. And as I mentioned, we've moved the larger buses into those areas specifically to handle places where we've seen crowding. bus operations and the planning and ridership staff continue to monitor that on a daily basis, including over the weekend, to see where we've seen occurrences of crowding, and then put those extra gap buses and the extra large 60-foot buses into those areas in order to provide better spacing and less crowding.
Pastor Miller, this is Dorval Carter. I want to be clear about one aspect of what Mike is talking about, which is there's no perfect solution to this issue. Mike will be the first to tell you that where we see the crowding occur and when and at what periods of times tends to move and vary from day to day, sometimes by hour to hour. So while we're being flexible and while we're adjusting service and while we're moving capacity around, I cannot guarantee that someone won't get on a bus and find it crowded, in spite of everything that we're doing. And that's one of the reasons why I was making the point earlier about there's a level of personal accountability that's key to this whole conversation. CTA, as you mentioned, can't police common sense. And, to some degree, we do need for customers to recognize that if a bus is crowded or has become crowded, that they need to wait for the next bus, wait for the next train. One of the reasons why we continue to provide full level of service is to minimize the impact of those waits and to maximize the ability to meet the capacity needs while maintaining social distancing. But we're going to get complaints, and if I could magically transform a bus to a particular location instantaneously to address that, I would. Unfortunately, that technology doesn't exist today in spite of all my pressuring my innovation team. But in the meantime, we are going to do everything that we can with the resources that we have to respond as effectively as we can to instances of crowding and concerns about managing that issue, particularly on the south and west sides of the city where we have seen those issues occur.
Yes, because we understand that that population, south and west side, don't have the privilege, many of them from working from home, and it's about the survival. So thank you so much for that and whatever we can do to try to help out.
Absolutely. We'll continue to do everything that we can to address that concern going forward.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dorval. Director Irvine, any questions for Mike?
No questions. Thank you.
Chairman Silva, do you have any questions for Mike Connolly on ridership?
No questions.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
I have a few questions. So are we getting support from the media with regards, I think we have from what I've seen, but in regards to getting the message out with regards to crowding, and then with regards to also PPE and, everybody wearing their PPE mask or whatever else they can on the buses? Has the media been supportive of that?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll answer that. This is Dorval Carter. Yes, the media has been supportive of that issue. Obviously, the media also likes, doing stories of instances where that's not happening. But I don't think that, I think that we've gotten that support. We certainly have been promoting it on social media. There's a lot of print media that we've put up in our stations and our buses. We also do audio announcements reinforcing those issues. But, as I indicated to you, and I keep saying this, I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record here, there is a level of personal accountability that needs to be a part of this conversation because CTA is not in a position to force social distancing and wearing of masks. And, to the degree that the public does not cooperate with those mandates, then it does become a problem.
Right. And with regards to the survey, so, and I know, Dorval, you had mentioned this earlier, that we're also, talking, I believe this is what you meant, looking at businesses and seeing what they're going to do, as far as maybe more people staying home, et cetera, et cetera. Would this survey also look at that? or try to
No,
get some?
This survey is focused on our customers. We're doing separate outreach along with the city to get a sense of what employers are going to be doing. We've also reached out to JLL, who actually has been doing their own analysis of downtown office buildings and getting information from them as well to help sort of guide us as we put together our transition plan for reopening. So there are other sources that we're going to get that information. But what Mike is talking about is really focusing on our customers and getting an understanding of both what their travel patterns have been and why, but also getting a sense of what they are going to need to see to feel comfortable continuing to ride as the city starts to reopen. So we're looking to really take a look at both the current state of ridership, but also a discussion around the future state of what that's going to look like.
No, and I think both what Mike is doing and the other that you're talking about are important because one will impact the other. So
absolutely,
that we're doing that. Okay, thank you.
I agree. Yep.
Thank you, Arabelle. Director Peterson, do you have any questions on ridership?
No questions.
All right. So thank you very much, Mike Connolly, for that presentation. Chairman Silva, we can get back to the regular agenda, which takes us to committee agenda item number 5, the contracts. And we can start with contract number A1.
Our next order of business is the review of contract number A1, a change order for transmission rebuilding. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Judge Chevrolet, any questions on contract number A1?
Just a quick question here. What page are we on? Because it's tough for me to keep track of this on the virtual board book. I've lost track of what pages we're on here.
I'm not sure on the virtual board book.
This is Kevin. It's 53.
50. Okay, I found it. Thank you very much.
53.
All right. I have no questions.
Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Reverend Jakes, any questions on A1?
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No question.
Director Irvine.
No questions.
Chairman Silva, any questions on this item?
No, no questions.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
No questions.
Director Peterson.
Yeah, the only question that I had on this one, are there any other expiring, warranties that, we should be aware of? So that we can avoid this kind of a change order in the future?
The issue here was that there was an increase in problems with the transmission unit, so they spent the money more quickly than they expected to. This contract originally was not to expire until December of 2021. So we did ask for this change order, and we are currently we're in the process of going out for a new procurement. So it's not so much that this was going to expire as that we use the funds more quickly. But we are, you will see some change orders coming, assuming we were going to come back earlier than we did. We were asking for change orders, but now we are starting to do more of our procurements online. We had been heading that way, so it wasn't, the leap wasn't as broad as it would have been before. We did do our first RFP online, and we are working on a process to do IFBs online.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Peterson. Of course, that was Ellen McCormick, who I forgot to introduce, speaking. Ellen McCormick and Juan Pablo Prieto will be making the presentations on these contracts. Chairman Silva, since there are no further questions on this item, we may proceed to contract number A2.
Our next order of business is the review of contract number A2, the servicing of washer tanks. Any questions?
Judge Chevrolet, any questions for staff on this A2?
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No questions.
Director Irvine.
No questions.
Chairman Silva, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
No questions.
Director Peterson.
No questions.
Chairman Silva, there are no further questions on this item, so excuse me. So we may proceed to contract number A3.
Our next order of business today is the review of contract number A3, disadvantages for labor and parts as required. Any questions?
Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No questions.
Director Irvine.
No questions.
Chairman Silva.
No questions.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
No questions.
Director Peterson.
Yeah, just one question. I think did we purchase these buses back in 2012?
I'm going to ask Don Bonds or his staff to jump in on that.
This is Donald Bonds. That's yes, Chairman.
Yeah, and question, what's the life expectancy of buses? Because I'm just looking at the contract and, you know, just trying to think through how long. I know they, like I said, I thought it was 2012 these were purchased. Just trying to, what's the life expectancy of these buses, or normally a bus in service?
Usually it's 12 years, as long as we do all of the overhauls. That includes the midlife and other overhauls throughout the time frame. They can last a little longer. As you know, our 6400 series Nova buses we've had since, I believe, 2004, I believe. But they've had a number of overhauls done on them.
Okay. All right.
No further questions, Terry.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I was just thinking about what happens when the warranty expires. I'm told we've had trouble with, you know, with some of these buses in terms of maintenance costs.
Ellen or Don, is there an answer to that question, or
would
can you get
enter,
back?
Yes, Ellen McCormick, Vice President of Purchasing. We would enter into new contracts to do the work, or we would try to handle it in-house.
Okay.
And that's correct. Yeah, I mean, depends on how much it costs. Sometimes we can get a assistance from the vendor if it's something that's been an ongoing problem. They will step in and give us they'll pay a percentage of whatever that cost is to repair the bus. And that, in this case, this is some of the things that did happen where it was an issue with the buses. So they did share the cost at a period of time.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Ellen and Don. Chairman Silva, that are all the questions for that contract, so we may now proceed to contract number A4.
Our next order of business is the review of contract number A4, a request for proposal for vehicles. Any questions?
Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No questions.
Director Irvine.
No questions.
Chairman Silva, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
No questions.
Director Peterson.
No questions.
Chairman Silva, there are no further questions on that item, so we may proceed to contract. Yes.
Hi,
sorry, go ahead.
Carter.
Yes.
I just want to make one sort of anecdotal observation about this particular contract. The Snow Fighter contract are basically replacing some Snow Fighters that we've had for, dare I say, decades. And the reason I mention that is that, Judge Chevrolet, you may actually have been an employee of CTA when we purchased the original Snow Fighters that are now being replaced, which gives you a sense of how long we've been using them. I personally was a staff attorney who worked on this negotiation for this contract. So we are well overdue in terms of replacing these Snow Fighters. And so this procurement is going to definitely put us in a much better position to deal with any winter weather that we may experience in the future.
Durable, I'm willing to bet, that I would be interesting to see the new machines that we purchase, how long those last. Because I'm just saying, they don't make them like they used to. I mean, that's a lot of use. And I mean, we actually got a huge return on the investment with these, because to last it that long, that's huge. That's huge.
I would agree, and I think we need to give Don and his team a tremendous debt of gratitude, because they have kept these machines running way beyond any reasonable useful life that one would expect from them.
What's the life expectancy or the warranty, I should say, on the new machines that we're purchasing? The typical 5-year parts and labor? Or?
This is Donald Bonds again. Yeah, that's usually what it is. And also just a note for the engines themselves on these vehicles, it's more with some of the same things you see on the new vehicles that are coming out now with the DPF filters and all this kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how long they last.
Okay.
Okay. Finished with questions. Chairman Silver, we are done with that item, so we may now proceed to contract number B as in boy, 1.
Our next order of business is the review of contract number B-1, change order pertaining to the design build contract for certain Blue Line station improvements. Any questions?
Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No questions.
Director Irvine.
No question.
Chairman Silver, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
No questions.
Director Peterson.
No question.
All right. Chairman Silver, there are no further questions on that item. So we may move to contract number B as in boy, 2.
Our next order of business is the review of contract number B2, a change order pertaining to construction services for the Quincy station. Any questions?
Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No questions.
Director Irvine.
No questions.
Chairman Silva.
No questions.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
No questions.
Director Peterson.
No questions.
Chairman Silver, there are no further questions, so we may proceed to contract number B as in boy, 3.
Our next order of business is the review of contract number B3, a change order pertaining to construction services for the Illinois Medical District Station. Any questions?
Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No questions.
Director Irvine.
No questions.
Judge Silva.
No questions.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
No questions.
Director Pearson, since you can see the station outside your window probably. Any questions?
Almost. At least I could walk to it. No questions.
That's right. No questions. All right. Chairman Silver, there are no further questions on this item, so we may now proceed to contract number B as in boy, 4.
Our next order of business is the review of contract number B4, authorization of funding for Mid-Con. Any questions?
Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No questions.
Director Irvine.
No questions.
Chairman Silva, any questions?
No questions.
Director Alvarez-Rosales. Director Alvarez-Rosales, are you there?
No questions. Sorry
Okay.
about that. Okay.
No problem. Director Peterson.
No question.
All right. Chairman Silva, since there are no further questions, we may now proceed to contract number C as in cat, 1.
Our final order of business is the review of contract number C1, a task order amendment pertaining to CTA Financial Systems. Any questions?
Judge Chevrolet.
No questions.
Reverend Jakes.
No questions.
Reverend Miller.
No questions.
Director Irvine.
No questions.
Chairman Silva.
No questions.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
No questions.
Director Peterson.
No question.
There are no further questions on this item, Chairman Silva, so there are no further questions on the contracts.
If there are no further questions, may I have leave to place these 9 contracts on the omnibus for board approval?
Is Director Jake so moved?
Director Miller, second.
The motion has been moved by Director Jakes, seconded by Director Miller. Chairman Silva, there is no further business to come before this committee.
If there is no further business to come before the committee, may I have a motion to approve the omnibus?
Director Jake, so moved.
Director Miller, second.
Moved and seconded. I will now take a roll call vote on the motion to approve the omnibus. Judge Chevrolet.
Yes.
Reverend Jakes.
Yes.
Reverend Miller.
Yes.
Director Irvine.
Yes.
Chairman Silva.
Yes.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
Yes.
Director Peterson.
Yes.
Chairman, the motion to approve the omnibus passes with 7 yes votes. We may now proceed to committee agenda item number 6.
And finally, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Director Jake, so moved.
Director Miller, second.
It's been moved and seconded. The motion to adjourn. Judge Chevrolet.
Yes.
Reverend Jakes.
Yes.
Reverend Miller.
Yes.
Director Irvine.
Yes.
Chairman Silva.
Yes.
Director Alvarez-Rosales.
Yes.
Director Peterson.
Yes.
That motion is approved with 7 yes votes. And in about a minute, we will begin the board meeting.